Tauntaun will freeze before you reach the first marker.
Then I'll see you in hell.
Welcome to the Beyond the First Marker podcast. Beyond the First Marker is a podcast that explores the greater Star Wars universe and how to represent themed characters, units, and battles on the Star Wars Legion Tabletop. This will involve digging into the rules and sharing modeling options to make your favorite units a playable reality. We are an Australian-based podcast and will be regularly chatting with members of the Australian Legion community and the larger global community. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome to Beyond the First Marker, Star Wars Legion podcast. I'm your co-host, Drew, aka Drewbacca, and with me tonight is, familiar to most of you, Brad, aka LoBrad. How you doing, LoBrad?
Man, I'm good. How you doing, Drew?
Very good. Very excited to be here.
Now, if we're talking Drewbacca, does that mean I get to start calling you Drewy?
Yeah, look, I'm used to being shortened, so Drewy works fine for me.
It is a very Australian thing to shorten names, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's a very Australian shortening, really.
It is, isn't it?
Although most people call me Drew, so it's a lengthening, really. But I'm happy. I'm happy with Drew for now.
There you go. Well, as Drew pointed out, some of you may know my name, or my voice, I should say. I am the host of the Warlord Games official podcast and of Cast Ice, the network that puts this podcast out. You may have heard me on those podcasts or on different bolt action podcasts over the years. But the reason that a lot of people in the Star Wars podcasting gaming world might know my name, at least, not my voice, is on the old Star Wars Armada FFG game. There was, of course, Intensify Forward Firepower podcast. Drunk Tarkin and all those guys. I was the guy who was the silent one. And as this podcast progresses, if you are not familiar with my work, you will find out that silence is rare for me. Anyway,
yeah, that's weird, dude. That's weird. The silent one.
Yeah, I think it was something like 20 episodes, and I never said a word. Yeah, ironic. Anyway, welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the First Marker podcast. Now, this is a brand new podcast for the Cast Ice / What is a Battle podcast network, and it is run by two giant Star Wars fans, two guys who have loved Star Wars from their earliest days, who are not new to Legion, but maybe aren't the most, how should I say, Drew, meta players?
No, not so much. We played a lot with each other.
That's right.
A little bit with other people.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not looking to wow anyone with our general skills.
True. However, we are looking to, with the advent of this podcast, we have been playing more than ever, and we are planning to play even more than that. So I'm guessing that the tactical conversation that we will be having on this show will be dramatically increasing shortly. However, that isn't really the purpose of this podcast. This podcast sort of has two simultaneous how should I say, prongs to its attack. The first, of course, is to talk about our favorite Star Wars units, our favorite Star Wars characters, our favorite Star Wars locales or background settings, and taking those and talking about sort of the rich history that Star Wars has, the lore, and translating that onto the Star Wars Legion tabletop. Now, we are both big fans of Star Wars, as I've said, and I'm a giant fan of Star Wars Legion podcasts, and I listen to, I think just about all of them. If I could find another one, I'd listen to that one too. And I've listened to them pretty much since the advent of the game, and I've I've loved the discussion. I've loved the crunch. I've loved the discussion of the units and the combinations and how things go together. I find the gamer in me finds that very entertaining and very interesting. However, I've noticed that we haven't had a lot of discussion of theme. There hasn't been a lot of discussion of how to theme a force, how to make an army. And in a lot of other games, 40K, fantasy, tabletop games of a numerous variety, theming is often encouraged, and people build their armies around a story, and it's sort of narrative driven in that regard. And then they make maybe scenarios around that, and they play games against their army's nemesis, for example, in a way that is a little more specific than, how should I say, Rebels versus Imperials. And I think that is the purpose of this. I think we would really like to dig into the lore, get into the stories that we love, and then talk about how we can get that onto the tabletop, and maybe suggest ways that you can too, both rules-wise, because there's some fabulous cards that allow you to add some spice to units these days, but also from a modeling standpoint. Now, Drew is the modeling master. Drew, you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the things you might be talking about as far as how to make your units you, or more thematically inclined?
I would say my first thing is to go with a theme. You've got to embrace the theme, I think.
Yeah.
That is, don't be too hung up on taking things that might not suit your play so well. Like, if you want a theme. If you do it sort of half-heartedly, it's not going to come through. It's not going to be great.
Right.
And you don't have to throw the game out the window, but
Absolutely not.
but try different things. Try what fits your theme. I'm probably primarily a modeler. My painting is okay, but I think I'm better with a sculpting tool than a paintbrush.
I think you're selling yourself a little short there, my friend. But yes, go ahead.
But yeah, I like to have a very coherent theme across my armies. So I look for the big picture first, and then I look at how I can incorporate units into that. So I'm going to be looking at unit selection, then how I can adapt the current models to fit that and to fit my theme.
Right on. Visually.
Yeah.
Now, keeping in mind, this is the guy who, and I know a lot of people have been very excited about the LED article that FFG put out recently, but and I know, Drew, you weren't necessarily the first person to do it, but you did it months ago, like 12 months ago. Your Vader was lit up. I'd say I had it done within a few months of the game dropping, more than a year ago. And your favorite unit, of course, you the most unmeta choice ever, has been pretty much your favorite unit, and is probably the most converted thing that you've done for Legion so far. That being your speeder, the T-47, and of course you added LED lasers coming out of its main guns that ran up through its base, and you had the base of it with a tow cable holding it to its base, dragging a crate.
I substituted out the standard, the flight stand that it came with, and because I just wanted a bit more bulk to put some batteries in there, so I just went with a crate. Because if an airspeeder's got a tow cable, then it's probably going to tow at some point. So it's towing.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is sort of Drew's hobby in a nutshell. That is an example of the madness that this man will be bringing to the podcast. Whereas I'm probably going to be talking more about 3D print and third-party vendor models that aren't official FFG models, but there are those models out there. Not always, people don't always know where they are, or may wonder about their quality. I have quite a few, and I've been painting them up and using those for quite a while. And so I'll be talking about how you can incorporate those in your forces as well. Between the two of us, I think we're fairly competent painters, and so I think the hobby will be strong on this podcast. I'm hoping anyway. And then, of course, we're also going to talk about the terrain, how you can theme maybe missions, because while the mission choice sort of bidding process for Legion is fantastic, I think occasionally, especially if you're trying to play themed narrative games, I think that you can play with it a bit and do some interesting stuff. I know the guys on the Legion Outriders podcast have done that in the past with their Prison Break scenario, amongst a couple of others. And I think we'll be talking about things like that and playing those and putting them on the Cast Dice YouTube page. So looking forward to the future as far as that goes.
Yes, the other thing we'll be talking about is the battlefields that you could create as well. So Star Wars is such a wide variety of terrain type to choose from. So you've seen a lot of probably Tatooine, Geonosis. They come up a fair bit.
Yeah.
Hoth is pretty popular as well. But there's so much out there that I would really like to try and translate onto the tabletop.
Absolutely.
Like Felucia is one that I'm really keen to bang a table out for at some point. And Mandalore's pretty interesting as well. Like, yes, it's a very flat desert-like planet, but the architecture could be kind of interesting to work with.
Agreed.
With the sort of, like, I'm just thinking like glass boxes and big smooth domes and on a very sort of sparse, pale white, sandy tabletop.
Yeah,
Could
man,
be kind of
that'd
fun
be
as well.
rad. And I know there's been some fantastic Scarif boards. I mean, there's been so many wonderfully built terrain pieces and boards that have been shown all over the internet. But we in Australia don't always see all of them sort of face-to-face. A lot of them are in the U.S. And Europe. But we do have some very talented local terrain makers, too. There are just some fantastic photos that have been coming up. There's some of the Facebook groups. And I guess through our Facebook page, I guess we'd like to start sharing those and start talking about, some of the great model painters and some of the terrain that we see down here as well, not just the ones that you see up in the Northern Hemisphere, although I'm sure we'll be discussing those as well. And God, Drew, I desperately want to see a Camino board. I would love to see platforms above water with waves. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. And I know there's a few people who've been putting out 3D print files of some of those, I guess, as I just said, platforms rising out of the sea. And of course, Cloud City. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about that at some point. But
that'd be a real commitment in terms of space. Like I don't see that board being modular. I see that being a fixed a board with fixed terrain pieces. It's not going anywhere, but like in a store, it just look amazing.
Right? Or a convention, piece. One of those things that you hook people coming in just because it just looks so different from every other tabletop around it. So I guess that takes us to our second prong, which is the local Australia sort of quote-unquote meta. Now, Drew and I are not big tournament players of Legion. We have both been very prolific tournament players in other game systems over the years. However, I think we're going to be tackling this from more of a, as I said, more of a narrative standpoint. That said, Australia has a very proud wargaming pedigree. We love wargaming. Our conventions are massive. The largest Age of Sigmar event in the world is held in Australia. Some of the biggest, gaming tournaments, events, conventions are down here. And given that proportionally to our population size, that's incredible. So I think it's very interesting that given how many Legion podcasts there are out there, that there aren't necessarily very many voices talking about the local Legion community. Now, I know it's a little hypocritical, Drew and I being, we just outed ourselves as sort of garage gamers as far as Legion goes. But we will be changing that. We will be interacting more with the community.
That's not to say we will play in Legion events. We have played at least one.
True.
And it's not that I'm adverse to playing in tournaments.
Absolutely.
It's just at the moment, I just don't feel like that's the game I'm able to play at the moment.
Yeah. Well, you also do have family obligations that often take up quite a lot of time.
Yeah.
So, Drew, father of many. So we're looking to have a sort of a rotating third chair. There are two of us, of course, as you've picked up by now, but we would like to have regular guests on from the local Legion community, people who are playing in sort of the big events or the people who are running the big events down here, and talking about what Legion looks like in Australia as opposed to other parts of the world. It's been said on many other podcasts for many other game systems that sort of the Australian way of looking at listing, the Australia meta, has always sort of been sort of skewed to one way or another, or just weird. And I'm hoping that in the Legion community, that's equally true. And yeah, I think it's just going to be really exciting. Now, you might say, if there are so many Legion podcasts out there now, why are you two starting now? I mean, what gives? To be honest, we both bought the core set when it came out. We've both been playing Legion on and off since the game released. And if you've listened to Cast Dice at all, you realize that I play a lot of game systems. However, one of the things that I don't want to say kept me out of Legion, because I was playing and painting and collecting. I have a huge Legion collection, was when the game first came out. I mean, FFG had to start from scratch. It isn't like a Warhammer game where there's 30 years of models and lore and history to build from. Even when Age of Sigmar started, for example, and they quote-unquote rebooted everything, there was still a massive model range to pull from. FFG had to start from somewhere. So when I say what I'm about to say, I don't want it to appear as me being critical. I mean, when the game started, there was Luke, Vader, and one troop choice for either side. And then, you had the jet bikes and you had the ATRTs, and then they added a few things. And then, of course, over time, they added some more. And when I first talked about Legion when it first came out, I wished that there were more generals, sort of more leaders in the game. And I wished for ways to add variety to existing basic troopers. And I think that we've hit that point. Not only have we gotten with the Clone Wars box set, we have 2 new factions. So the game's bulked out to 4. So you're not just always thinking about 1 or 2 armies that you'll have to face. You have to consider armies that have, at this point, distinctly different characteristics. And I think that's going to make games way more interesting, or events way more interesting as far as the variety goes. I mean, just the differentiation that you'll see on the tabletop will be impressive.
That was a hurdle for me at the beginning. Like when I first heard about the game, it was like almost over 2 years ago, and I'm a mad gamer. I'm a Star Wars fan.
Oh yeah.
But I didn't immediately say, yes, this is a game I want to play, because I guess because Star Wars has such a certain look to it, or at least initially, my initial thought was it's got a very certain look to it, and there's not going to be a lot for me to do with that. I can paint up a couple of squads of stormtroopers, and they're going to look like someone else's couple of squads of stormtroopers, and we'll duke it out. And
yeah,
I guess the combination of a very expected aesthetic and not seemingly a lot of variation between units, it just, like, almost very sadly passed me by.
Yeah.
But I started to think about all the things that are not emphasized so much in the movies, but are there, but they might be in the background, or they're just a single shot in the background, and we can take that and say that was a really cool one guy standing in the background there.
Exactly.
Who's he fighting for? Why is he fighting? Who are his mates? What equipment are they bringing? Where are they fighting? Let's figure that out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing that I want to do.
Absolutely. And with the introduction of the upgrade packs for all 4 factions for the basic troopers, we're getting ways to add variety to just the basic troopers. You're not just going to see, well, you might, but you're not going to see as many rebel armies, for example, that are just all Z6 troopers. Not to mention the rebalancing of points has added the quote unquote viability to a lot of units that people weren't using before. And I think that's just really opened things up. And you're just going to see just a lot more creativity, I think, in Legion listing, which is great. And, as I said, with the introduction of a third and fourth faction. I think it's just, again, open things up. And with every expansion that's come out, there are more, accessory cards or upgrade cards that you can put onto your characters, onto your units to give them, a little bit of flavor. And once you start sprinkling that on, you're able to now theme existing units to a particular army, to an aesthetic, or to an idea that really, fits if you want to build an entire army built around a narrative. Now, I hear people in the background talking about efficiencies, yelling from the internet. Now, I understand. Drew and I aren't necessarily going to be talking about efficiency, like the most efficient units or the most efficient builds, or the way that you're going to try and curb stomp your opponent on a tabletop. But
we'll put that up front. We'll have that up front.
Yeah, exactly.
That if you want to win games, there are better podcasts to listen to.
But I want to throw out a challenge, and this is something that I've said before on other podcasts for other game systems. But I actually firmly believe that Legion is a fairly balanced game. I think it's pretty damn good for its balance, for all the talk about the efficiencies. And when people are talking about the efficiencies in this game, I mean, they're really getting into heavy-duty maths to figure out just how efficient things are. And when they're comparing things, I would like to throw out there that now that the rebalancing in points have happened in particular, most things are quote unquote viable. And I'd like to challenge people to try and play a game or learn an army and play and figure out its character and really think about how to play it and not worry about the efficiencies. Build it because you think it's cool. Because guess what? Everything in it's still going to be, quote unquote, usable now that things have been balanced. Challenge yourself, win a game like that. And then I think you'll find if you do it enough that, the quote unquote efficiencies, what is it that Han says? Don't tell me the odds. I don't want to know.
Exactly.
I want to know what's cool.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah. Han summed it up. Never tell me the odds.
That's right. That's right. Well, Drew, we've talked a little bit, or I've sort of outed our pedigree a little bit. You want to tell us a little bit about you as a gamer so we get an idea? Now, you are, as I said, the sort of the terrain / the modeling hobby guy, but you are also an incredibly proficient wargamer with a long history of gaming. You want to give us the elevator speech?
So I started gaming in my teens, like I guess a lot of gamers do, and I started playing Warhammer Fantasy, and I think, again, most people probably start with, most people of my age started with either Fantasy or 40k, and I played Fantasy right up until it died. I was regularly playing in tournaments in my 20s, and whilst I would not. I would downplay my success as a general, but I did win a few awards as a painter / modeler for armies. So
absolutely,
because for armies with a strong theme that people like to look of. So, and then when Warhammer died, I did not transition into Age of Sigmar. I looked at Kings of War was probably my next port of call. And I really enjoyed that game, but I think I just moved on as a person a bit. I didn't have the time to go and meet lots of new people at events every couple of months.
Yeah,
that was me in my 20s. Now I've moved on. I'm a little bit more isolated, a little bit more closed off. No, hopefully I can go out and meet some more people playing this game, but like I said, as soon as I convinced myself that there were modeling opportunities and things that I can create and little niches to fill with this game, I was in.
Yeah, man. And we're going to talk about your army in a couple minutes, but your Hoth army is amazing. And that's before.
Thank you.
And well, you've built it and painted it and converted it lovingly over time, and you still haven't added Tauntauns or the Hoth veteran box, and it is totally Hoth all the time. So I think that is definitely worth talking about. But we'll get to that in a minute.
We'll come to that. How about you, Brad?
Well,
what's your background?
I have a very long history of podcasting and wargaming. I basically started gaming way back when. I basically started reading basically learned to read from comic books and Dragon magazine, and worked my way up through games like Car Wars, BattleTech, all the classics, D&D, Marvel, the Marvel role-playing game back in the 80s, amongst millions of others, it seems. And then at some point, I sort of stepped in Warhammer 40,000, and I don't know what happened, and I sort of looked up 20-odd years later, having worked for Games Workshop corporate in multiple countries, to have moved to Australia, and sort of stepped away from that and started playing Warhammer Fantasy, where I met you. Hi, Drew.
We made it the tournament.
We did. You have excellent taste in music, by the way. And then we, I started to play other game systems. Warhammer died. And I got heavily into Bolt Action and was part of the Bolt Action Alliance, which is now, or I should say boltaction.net, which is now the Bolt Action Alliance, was a part of podcasts like the Ghost Army podcast, which, if you are familiar with that podcast, was a podcast that sort of tore into particular battles and historical events, and then talked about how to theme your armies and missions to those events. And those units, and that is kind of what I'm hoping to bring to this podcast, is to do sort of the Ghost Army podcast, if you're familiar with that, but for Star Wars Legion. We're really excited about that. And I guess if I was to go back, just to really talk about how old I am, if I haven't already, is I picked up Star Wars. I was taken to Star Wars because way back when, of course, VCRs didn't exist, and the only way to see a movie was in the theater. And thankfully, right before Empire Strikes Back came out, because I would have been too young when A New Hope originally dropped, they showed A New Hope in the cinema, and I was taken to see that. And then it blew me away, changed the way I looked at toys and my life, and I have been a nerd ever since. And somewhere along the way, between that and then a couple weeks later, going to see, or months, I don't know how long it was, going to see Empire Strikes Back. And, that pretty much solidified my love of all things Star Wars. And because that was my entry point, that time period, all my toys that were Star Wars were from that time period. And then shortly thereafter, a couple of years later, I picked up G.I. Joe, and then I never looked back. So whereas a lot of people have collections, Star Wars toys that sort of span massive amounts of years, mine's a very narrow window of Empire Strikes Back toys, of which I have a crud load. My Millennium Falcon is the Empire Strikes Back Millennium Falcon. I had the X-Wing, the Dagobah playset, the Hoth playset, and had, IG-88. Like, all my favorite toys were from that time period. So I'm massively into that. And so I'm pretty darn excited that in the first episode of this podcast, we're going to talk Hoth, because Empire, baby.
That's my starting off point. Like, I think when I was maybe 8 or 9, I somehow avoided exposure to Star Wars for a good chunk of my life at the beginning. When I was about 8 or 9, I saw just the Battle of Hoth. And some friend had it playing in his house, and I saw it. And I just seeing the AT-ATs, it's just like, what is that? Why don't I know what this is? Tell me more about this. Yeah. And I got no answers. But then I found a novelization of Empire Strikes Back.
Nice.
And so as my grade 3 reading, I think I picked it up and started pretending to read it. And I was just waiting to get to the pictures in the middle, because I wasn't following the story. This is 9-year-old Drew just not following. and my teacher called me out. She said, "You don't know what's going on, do you?" I said, yeah, sure, I know what's going on, but no. I just wanted to look at the pictures. I think I didn't get much more until the special editions got released in the mid-90s. And that was the first time I saw, I think, all 3 films. But from then, I was completely on board. I was very excited for the prequel trilogy, and I think maybe it's a good time to point out here that this is going to be possibly an overly positive podcast. But
yes.
I mean, this seemed like a good time to point it out that I quite like the prequel trilogy, and people describe it as like you're not allowed to like the prequel trilogy, and I think that's ridiculous.
Well, I think it's funny that now the prequel trilogy is okay to like, and the new movies aren't. And you go, I seem to remember this exact same hate when the prequels were out. I mean, this seems to be cyclical. What's going on there? Yeah, look, I've said it on the on Cast Dice, and I'm going to say it here. There's enough negativity on the internet. We're going to talk about what we love. As my grandma does like to say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. And so if we talk about something on this show, we're going to love it. Now, I'm sure we're going to point out some ridiculousness along the way, and we'll have a laugh about it. But we're never going to be up in your grill going, this is awful.
Ryan Johnson ruined Star Wars. No.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there's some parts of Star Wars I'm not a massive fan of, but there's a reason why I have a Death Star tattoo. I mean, I am a massive Star Wars fan, and so if you're expecting some critical hate of what's going on, you're not going to get it on the show. Like, if you want to talk it privately off air, I'm sure we can talk about something like that, which is a good time to point out that we do have the Beyond the First Marker podcast Facebook page. And if you haven't found it yet, please go. We're going to be showing pictures of the units and the armies that we're talking about, the terrain we're building, and we're also going to be sharing models from our friends and the local community. It's going to be cool, not to mention about 1 million Star Wars memes. So please check it out. Run over, hit like, and we'd love to hear from you. Just message the page. You'll get either Drew or I. And it'll be great to see which one of us gets to you first. Well, Drew, I think we've sort of exhausted introducing ourselves and the podcast and talking about sort of the expectations, and so people know what's going on. I think it's about a half an hour in. I think it's about time that we get this party started. So one of the things that we're going to do in every single episode of this podcast is, and it's just a bit of fun here, is to sort of quiz one another using Star Wars trivia questions. Now, we are going to get these from, it would be very easy for you and I, Drew, to go down some pretty weird rabbit holes to get questions, and I'm not sure how good that would make for listening. Maybe we will go down that at some point. But we're starting with some very generic canned questions that we got from an old copy of Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. Now, we are going off of 2 cards. We're pulling the best 5 questions we could find off these cards. I haven't seen your cards. You haven't seen my cards. And I got to say, if your cards are anything like my cards, this isn't going to be the most challenging first round. However, this is how we're going to start it out. So I'm going to quiz Drew with 5 questions. He's going to quiz me with 5, and we'll keep a running score of how we're going. And we'd like to encourage you to keep score at home as well. Again, I think this first episode might be a little bit of a warm-up. And not necessarily a hardcore challenge, but we are looking forward to making it a little more entertaining as we go. That said, I think this will be fun. So, Drew, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'll read to you first.
All right.
Question 1. Which side of C-3PO's chest did the Jawas attach a restraining bolt?
I can see it. Oh, man. It's his left side.
It's our left side. It's his right side.
Oh, yeah. No, I got that wrong. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, because I was thinking the other way around. Okay, got it. I confused myself. I hate left-right questions. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, especially when it's stage left, stage right. All right, next question. What did the character known as Minch in the first draft of Empire evolve into?
Minch. Oh, that I don't actually know.
I didn't know this one either.
Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe I shouldn't have apologized for these questions. How about, I'm going to go with my favorite character from Empire. How about Lando?
Oh, no, it's Yoda.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm 0 for 2. Ouch.
All right. Excuse my pronunciation. How does a Cantina patron translate the remark of a drunken alien who tells Luke, Negola Dewagi Waldaga?
He doesn't like you either.
He doesn't
like you. Sorry, yeah. I don't like you either.
I'll pay that one.
All right. I'm painting those 2 at the moment, so I really hope I should know that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, this one I challenge. I'm going to read the question and the answer as they're written there.
Okay.
What vehicle did Luke Skywalker take down with a harpoon gun and a landmine?
Well, it's a thermal detonator, and it was an AT-AT.
Yeah.
Okay, phew. All right.
Okay. Oh, actually, I think so initially I was thinking Luke took it down with a harpoon gun, like the tow cable. I'm like, hey, wait, no, Luke didn't do that. But the harpoon gun is in, he pulled himself up.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that works.
Right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the question redeemed itself.
Okay, phew.
And my last question, who created the unique sound effects used in the trilogy? The original trilogy.
Oh, I'm terrible with crew questions. It's not Ralph McQuarrie. He did visuals. It's not John Williams. He did music. It's not... Yeah, I got nothing.
Ben Burt.
Oh, I did actually know that. That's too bad. Oops. All right.
All right, you got 2 for a first effort.
Ouch. Ooh. Well, let's start.
I'm not gonna act so smug though, because I'm thinking choking might be a thing.
First episode. Let's make ourselves look bad.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. How many landing struts does an X-wing have? And I know you know this.
I just built one.
Yeah.
Out of a Lego one. 3.
That's right. So obviously I got that one. Let's get a little harder. How many sections comprised a Cloud City waste door? Namely the one that dumped Luke out into the atmosphere of Bespin at the end of Empire Strikes Back.
I'm going to go with 10.
There were 4.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
apparently.
I'm picturing something much more intricate.
Mm-hmm. Well, here we go. This one I think you know, but what is the serial number of the stormtrooper whose armor Luke wore on the Death Star?
No, it's like the George Lucas number, yeah? Like
It is.
No, I don't actually know the number by heart, so I'm gonna have to concede.
TK421. TK421.
I should have that one. All right.
Yes. All right. Now this one, I got wrong when I was quizzing myself. So, which pilot flew Red 2 during the first Star Wars battle?
Ooh. That's Wedge, isn't it?
Yep. Wedge Antilles. Correct.
Because the Lego X-Wing kit that I have has swappable markings. So I didn't even know they were there at all, but the X-Wing wings have a little red line on them. So Red 2 has got 2 little red lines. Red 5's got 5 little red lines. And the X-Wing kit that I have has swappable parts. So you can make a Wedge X-Wing or a Luke X-Wing.
That's cool. I didn't know that. Oh, that's rad. Yeah, I'm really excited that Wedge is making an appearance in the new movie because he was my favorite fighter pilot. Porkins aside, rest in peace, Porkins.
But did you read X-Wing? The book series?
Yeah, the book series.
Oh, that was a brilliant series.
Way back when.
I'm kind of disappointed they got decanonized, but anyway.
Yeah.
Last question.
I'm just glad Wedgie's back in it. Yeah, no, last question. Here we go. I think this is too easy. What squadron made the initial torpedo run against the first Death Star?
So are we talking the successful run or the actual first one depicted?
The first one shown in the movie. What was the first squadron that made the initial torpedo run against the Death Star?
I'm drawing a blank here because I can only think of Red Squadron, Blue Squadron.
Good guess, but no. I think you need to go a little more nasally, and you need to think about the first ship that you destroyed me in X-Wing with. It's a Y-wing.
Oh yeah. I knew it was Y-wing, but I can't think what the Y-wing squadrons are called.
Yep, it's the color on the wings. The ship that you wrecked me with, Gold Squadron. Gold Squadron. Yeah, that guy. That nasally voice.
Okay, so that's 2-all.
At least we're tied.
Considering how kind of dismissive we were at these questions, we're not doing too well.
I think
at least we're both not doing too well.
I am never, ever, ever going to make fun of the questions again because that hurt. Ouch. Well, look forward to next week when we can get even more problems wrong because we're going to try and out-clever ourselves. Ugh.
What is it, General?
My lord, the fleet has moved out of Lightspeed. Comscan has detected an energy field protecting an area of the 6th planet of the Hoth system. The field is strong enough to deflect any bombardment.
The rebels are alerted to our presence. Admiral Ozzel came out of Lightspeed too close to the system.
He felt surprised was wiser.
He is as clumsy as he is stupid. General, prepare your troops for a surface attack.
Yes, my lord.
The Battle of Hoth, also known as the Assault on Echo Base or the Evacuation of Echo Base, was a major battle fought in 3 ABY and was considered a major victory for the Galactic Empire and the single worst battlefield defeat suffered by the Rebel Alliance during the Galactic Civil War. The battle was an Imperial invasion led by Darth Vader, aimed at destroying the Rebel Alliance's Echo Base hidden on the remote ice world of Hoth, capturing Luke Skywalker. The base's location was discovered by a Viper probe droid deployed by Darth Vader's Death Squadron that had landed on Hoth.
The Imperial attack force consisted of primarily of AT-AT walkers, commanded by General Maximilian Veers. His army was tasked with destroying Echo Base's main power generator to allow orbital bombardment of the planet and for Darth Vader to land on the planet. Spearheading the defense of the generator was Rogue Squadron, manning snowspeeders, commanded by Luke Skywalker, renowned for being the pilot who destroyed the first Death Star. The snowspeeders, however, did not have the necessary firepower to bring down the walkers, so Skywalker suggested an alternative tactic to rip up the walkers with tow cables issued to every snowspeeder.
Despite the efforts by Rogue Squadron, the power generator was eventually destroyed by Veer's main AT-AT. The remaining base personnel proceeded to evacuate as the 501st Legion, led by Darth Vader, entered the base. The overwhelming Imperial invasion forced the rebellion to scatter the Alliance fleet across the galaxy, leading to a multitude of scattered skirmishes across the galaxy for over 6 months before the Empire's sudden and crushing defeat at the Battle of Endor. Ooh. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has been brought to you by Wikipedia. Now,
thank you, random editors of Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly, right. Now, the Battle of Hoth is, of course, on the ice planet. It has been of course, portrayed at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. The Battle of Hoth takes place 3.5 to 4 years after the destruction of the original Death Star, so after the events of A New Hope. And at this particular moment in time, there is sort of a gathering of rebel leadership on Hoth at Echo Base to discuss their plans. And as we said in the preamble, provided by Wikipedia, that probe droids were sent to planets all over the galaxy looking for the rebels. Vader, of course, recognized the power generator as somewhere where they could be and announced the assault. Now, the Admiral Ozzel, the admiral in charge of the fleet at that time, disagreed with Vader. Vader said, nope, that's where we're going. And Bob's your uncle, off they went. And Ozzel, despite Vader's requests to appear behind the far moon, did not and jumped in right next to the planet. Of course, as part of this, the probe droid was recognized by the rebels, was destroyed by Han and Chewie, and then that led...
They didn't hit that hard.
No, of course not, right? They just, boom, I don't know what happened. And then General Raikkonen of the Rebel Alliance ordered the evacuation at that time, but it was when the Imperial fleet jumped in close that the power generators were put up, and that meant that when the fleet circled above Hoth, the Imperials could not bombard the planet from space, nor could they land troops directly on the base for a direct assault. Instead, they deployed well north of the compound and Blizzard Force under command of Maximilian Veers. By the way, Maximilian, really? Am I the only one that thinks that he should have a mustache and go, look at my AT-ATs. I'm going to come get you.
His voice kind of does match the name.
It does. Look, I get
He's just oozing with arrogance and self-confidence, isn't he?
And his face. But moving on, that does lead to the direct assault. Now, of course, during this time, the rebels try and evacuate the fleet.
Hey, can I just
yes,
pause you
please.
there on a meta level here? So this is the first land battle we've seen in Star Wars.
True.
In any situation.
Correct.
So arguably, this moment here is also the inception of Star Wars Legion.
Correct.
Like this is where it starts.
Mm-hmm. That is
Cool.
a very good point.
It's a fitting place to start this podcast because
It is. And it's ironically where it's almost at this point, it's a little bit before this that this podcast gets its name. Beyond the First Marker is, of course, talking about the perimeter of Echo Base. But anyway, the AT-ATs of Blizzard Force attack. They're supported by AT-STs. They're supported by, it's been described as flying gun platforms, which I don't believe we've ever properly seen in movies and or... at least not in anything that isn't a comic book.
I think it's in some of the novels that sort of tie into the battle.
And then we have, of course, the snowtroopers led by Vader in the actual ground assault. Now, as part of
blast
this,
their way into the base. They blow a hole in the side of the mountain and in they go.
Meanwhile, Veers is able to destroy the power generator, dropping the shields. Meanwhile, the rebels have been evacuating transports with X-Wing support and firing an ion cannon at the Star Destroyers in space before allowing the transports to get away. And at some point, it all goes wrong, and they just start throwing as many transports out as they can because the net is tightening. Now, as we said in the beginning, this is a tremendous defeat for the rebels. Echo Base was supposed to be a hidden, secure location after the Yavin complex had been compromised at the end of A New Hope. And the Rebel Alliance had sort of spread itself around amongst a bunch of bases. And apparently the only reason why all of the leadership happens to be at this base was for this conference or this meeting right before the probe droid lands, which is why you have the generals, you have Han and Chewie, you have Leia, and you have Luke Skywalker sort of all in one place. Everyone's been sort of reunited. And that is why... its evacuation is particularly important because some of the highest ups in the Rebel Alliance are at that battle at that time. And so rather than fighting it out, they couldn't risk it, and they just had to scatter like rats from a sinking ship, which they did. Not that I'm playing Imperials in this particular battle at all. Now, Drew, that's sort of the long and the short. What are your sort of thoughts about the Battle of Hoth? Do you have anything you'd like to add? Any anecdotes that you picked up from your reading about this?
Where to start or where to go? I think it's as I said before, this is just iconic for most people, and I don't know, like with all those, especially on screen with the AT-ATs walking around this, you're not really looking at much else. I'm not sure whether the are the AT-STs in the original, or were they added in the special edition?
I am almost 100% there in the original. I tried to go back and watch the original on YouTube today for that very question, and I am almost 100% sure that as a kid, I saw one and went, "What the hell is that?" As a kid, and went, "What's the two-legged one?" Because I think it's just a passing shot, and it's halfway through the battle, and it's just running around off to the side, and it isn't actually shooting at anything. It is literally just running along.
It's just there. It's just sort of suggesting that there is more to the Imperial Force than just these walkers. Although why you would need more than the walkers, who knows? Like, I'm sure there's plenty we're not seeing on screen, but those walkers, they're just so intimidating and just unstoppable. You know,
Right.
those lines of rebel troopers, they don't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, guys, you put up a good fight, but really, you got lucky taking two down.
Now, Drew, I'm going to say something that might be a little heretical here. As cool as I thought AT-ATs were as a kid, they weren't my favorite part of this battle. My favorite part, besides having that little kid moment of looking at the AT-ST run in the background going, "What's the little guy? What's that going on?" was the actual base assault itself. Now, as keeping in mind that I love stormtroopers, I absolutely loved the look of the armor from the original movie, and I was completely unprepared as a kid for when the door blew in the second time, like it did in A New Hope on the Tantive. All of a sudden, the snowtroopers arrived, and I just thought they were the epitome of cool. I absolutely loved the way their helmet, the long helmets. The way their jackets or their cloaks were longer. I just thought they were the coolest looking stormtrooper ever. And then,
well, they're even more inhuman looking than they're even more covered up.
Right.
There's even less facial features than the original ones. So, just very cold looking, very impersonal, very intimidating.
Very cold looking. I like what you did there.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, and it's that. Some of my favorite Vader moments, of course, are the beginning of A New Hope, the beginning of Empire when he storms Echo Base, as part of that battle. I think it's fantastic, and of course Rogue One, where you actually get the promise of Vader wiping out everyone by himself. It's just awesome. So for me, when I'm looking at Legion for this, I mean, clearly there are people who make AT-ATs. You could get an AT-AT made, depending on how you want to say it. And you could put it on the Legion tabletop. I mean, if you go to Disney World, of course, there's the talk of the AT-AT popcorn bucket being almost the right scale. Perhaps it's too small. That's a whole other debate. But that was something that a lot of people were putting on tabletops as terrain in early parts of the game. I, for one, have a destroyed AT-AT terrain piece from a 3D print company in the U.S. that is just fantastic, that I like to put on my Legion tabletop. But that isn't actually an army on the tabletop. Now, Drew, shall we talk Imperials? If I was to build a force that was themed around this, I was going to start with Darth Vader because just to recreate that scene from my childhood that I absolutely love, of Vader being surrounded by a phalanx of snow troopers, is just fantastic. Now, in Legion terms, that means probably the original Darth Vader. Although if you're running Veers simultaneously, who's obviously also in this battle, you might use Operative Vader to make things
just to make it a little bit more manageable.
Yeah.
At those points.
Yeah, exactly, because Vader's a lot of points. But the great thing about original Vader, and what I think really makes it fit, is the idea that it's the 501st. It's Vader's fist. It's the Legion that followed Vader into the Jedi Temple in Revenge of the Sith. And so you have those guys as his backup. Now, with them, they're, I like to think of them as being sort of implacable. You just can't stop them. They are unstoppable. They're going to come at you. And so with the original Vader, with the fact that his leadership value is that null, it means that you can suppress them all day long and they will never run away. They just don't care. As long as they stay near Vader. And I think that perfectly fits thematically. Now, if you're trying to squeeze the points and you get Operative Vader in, he doesn't do the same thing. He can be suppressed off. So from a mechanical standpoint, I would probably stay with original Vader. But I would
because this Imperial force is overwhelming. They're confident. They know they're going to win this. You don't want them running off the table.
Yeah, exactly, right? Now, I was going to back him up with the obvious troop of, a wall of snowtroopers. Now, snowtroopers have the reputation, of course, as being the unit, as being fairly close combat specialists. Now, they do have the flamethrower, which is very close up, but they also have the ion trooper. And in the FAQ recently that, of course, changed all the point values, not only did the ion trooper get cheaper, his range got extended to 3. So all of a sudden, the Ion Trooper on snows became, I think, a much more quote-unquote viable option. Not to say that I don't have a couple painted as it is and have used them in games, but all of a sudden, look, hey, a couple extra points, I'm not complaining. Now, I do love the fact with snowtroopers is a lot of people say how slow they are and how short their weapon range is. But, you know, a lot of podcasts are talking about how good Tauntauns are and how good Shore Troopers are, and, you know, because they get the free activations. But I'd like to point out that if we go back to Snow Troopers, now they're not maybe the quote-unquote meta choice, but they do have the rule steady, which means that after you move, you can perform a free ranged attack. Now, having played a lot of Snow Troopers in our games, I've realized that no matter how many times you suppress them, if they're next to Vader and they're not running away, as long as they still have that one activation, guess what? They are still moving and shooting. You know, I guess you can't aim and shoot, but they are still, it's still that feeling from the movie where they're just walking off the hits and coming at you as long as they stay near Vader, which I think perfectly feels, you know, fits this theme and really helps me to visualize how I want to build my force. So I've included a bunch of flamethrowers in my army, and I've also included some ion just in case, you know, you run into some vehicles and for a little more long range punch. But I've backed those up with the other thing that we haven't talked about so far, which is this is the first appearance of the E-Web. Now, the E-Web, of course, is the man-packed sort of laser cannon for the Imperials. And I think that while you're moving your snows up with Vader and just moving forward, their range isn't fantastic, and they can sort of be picked apart at range. I've rounded that out with a couple of E-Webs and some of the upgrades that you can add to them, depending on the game I'm playing. But yeah, some of the generators, I mean, they really do add that long range punch that the Force really does need until it can get close up and personal. And man, there is nothing scarier than looking down the barrel of a wall of Snow Troopers and Vader coming at you. But if you can, you know, neutralize some of the pieces that an opponent might use to blunt that charge, Tauntauns, for example, or, you know, some other unit, Royal Guard, whatever else. If you can start plinking those models off using your E-Webs or put strategic pins on to reduce the efficiency of some of the units that are coming at you, I think that really adds a lot, not to mention, especially if you back them up with an ATST, which you can do. Now, if you're going to put Vader and 2 E-Webs and a bunch of, you know, troop units in, you're not really going to have room for a fully tooled ATST, but they did get cheaper. So, yeah, there's a lot of cool, fun stuff going on there.
I think you don't need a heap more in terms of, like, infantry, because we don't really see it. Like, the Snow Troopers get dropped in fairly close. Everything else is mobile, so...
Mm-hmm. And Vader got a lot more fun with the addition of the Vader command cards from the Operative Vader pack. So, yeah, I think there's... I'm looking forward to putting Vader. I haven't run Vader since those cards have come out, and I guess they're not technically out yet, but they're widely available. So people have been messing around with them, and I'm looking forward to putting those down. Now, I did mention Veers, and there is another set of options that you can add to this. And while they're not necessarily pictured in the movie, I would imagine that there would be Empire support staff somewhere in that force. So I'd imagine that perhaps you'd have some generic officers. I'd imagine you'd have a medical droid somewhere, maybe an astromech. So I would imagine some of those would be in there. And with those characters, as you add them in, if you're going to use sort of the generic leader or you're using Veers to really, you know, fit the theme for this, environmental gear, I think, is a must. I think you have to add that. And also, I think strict orders also absolutely fits a Veers theme build.
I think as well with the environmental gear. Sorry to
no, please go ahead.
Like if we're gonna be, you know, we're not recreating battles here, but we're if we're kind of getting the look, then you probably want a fair bit of difficult terrain on the board to get it to look like what's going on in the film, and then that's going to justify taking a whole bunch of sets of environmental gear.
Right. Now, interestingly, environmental gear doesn't really do much on Snow Troopers themselves because they're already Speed 1. And so's Vader. So I think that's more for some of the other units. Yeah. So, Drew, is there anything else you would add there? I know there's the obvious. Everyone's going to, I hear the internet yelling in the background, electric binoculars on Veers. Okay, I got it. Cool. Yes. Aim tokens are great. Anything that you would add there, Drew, or any other unit choices that you think would be a good fit for Imperials for this battle?
I don't think so. I think I'm just thinking about this from a modeling point of view, and really you are pretty well serviced by the stock models straight out of the box to do this. So if you do want to do a theme force and you're not very confident customizing your miniatures in terms of cutting them up, repositioning or sculpting, this is probably a good place to start, because you get your snowtroopers out of the box. Mm-hmm. They're done. Vader, Veers, ATST.
And the E-Webs are already in snowtrooper gear, which is fantastic. Incidentally, in case you're thinking, but if you're just basing off one box and you're talking about how to mix up your force, how can you do that? I own 3 E-Webs, and I have one that I've cut up for my mid-bin force. So they have generic stormtrooper crew. So I use some of those spare crewmen, and some of the crewmen from the existing snowtrooper builds. And I sort of cut apart some of the arms. So instead of having the gunner with 2 arms holding forward, I have one with 1, and then his arms sort of waving. I've taken some of the crouching snowtroopers from the E-Web kit, and I've changed up the arms with some of the more regular conventional snowtroopers, and that's really added some nice variety, because those are 2 new poses of snowtroopers that of course are not in the snowtrooper box. And when you're trying to build an army or theme of force around one particular box of models, that really helps. Also, until recently, we weren't seeing a ton of Ion Troopers. In fact, I'm not sure we're going to continue to see a lot of Ion Troopers. So the Ion Trooper model is another model that I was cutting in and out, converting, just doing simple arm swaps. And that really did also add some nice variety to the troops, because it just meant that they weren't always all the same, which is really cool.
I don't know if this is I don't know if this is getting off topic a bit, but it just made me think, and this is something that, again, I thought of it for this game for a long time, is because the models that Fantasy Flight Games are producing want to reflect what we see in the movies. Mm-hmm. Often you see specialists, or tactically special troops units represented by troops from a particular theater. Mm-hmm. And it can make it difficult to make a coherent force using models from one particular theater. So Imperials not so much, because they, other than snowtroopers, they tend not to adapt their gear to the climate.
Stormtroopers, baby, they're great. Anyway, go ahead.
They all look the same, except for snowtroopers for some reason. But you get those specialized models that look like they should be in a particular theater. It's worse for the rebels, I find, for this, in that, as we'll talk about, or I will talk about in a minute, the rebel troopers out of the box, from the base game, they look more like the Endor Force from
yes, they do,
Return of the Jedi. And then you have a veterans box, which look more like the troops from Hoth, who fill a very different role to the base troops.
They do.
And to just put them on the table together, if you want to build a force that plays in a certain way, it's going to look a little bit jarring unless you do something about it.
Well, let's talk about how you did that, because your basic rebel force that you were building from day dot with just the basic core set was a Hoth force. Now you added you did some pretty serious green stuffing.
I'm going to upset the apple cart a little bit here. I wasn't necessarily going for Hoth. I think I had something more like Starkiller base in mind, which was like a little bit more greenery. I guess, but I just went to Hoth for inspiration, and it's kind of become a Hoth
Right.
It's the Hoth Force, but I plan on making some trees to fight amongst, just to break the battlefield up, which I know is not Hoth, but I like the look of them.
Now, hold on. If you'd like to see pictures of the Force that we're talking about now, there's a couple of pictures up through the Facebook page for this podcast, and we are going to add more as the week goes on. So stay tuned, and we will be showing a lot of pictures of Drew's beautifully converted models on the page, so you can follow along while we're talking about it.
Okay. But yes, so when I first started, there were no veteran models. There were only Rebel Trooper models.
That's right.
And I wanted to do a cold climate force. So I decided I did a simple modification to the basic Rebel Trooper model, which was just a bit of fur around the neck. And to do that, I used a 2-part putty. I don't think I used green stuff. I used like a Tamiya Quick Type. I like that. You can file it a bit more than green stuff. But it works in a very similar way.
Right.
And very simple technique, but just sort of applied consistently across the whole army. And just that little detail takes what is a fairly temperate-looking uniform and makes it a very cold weather-looking uniform.
It really does. And adding to that, when I started with my Rebels, I bought a ton of alien heads from Gadzooks because I didn't want the same looking Rebel troopers. It's one thing to have a million stormtroopers that look the same, but I wanted my Rebel troopers to look significantly different from one another. So I bought quite a few packs of their alien heads over the years as they've expanded them out. And I've been, mixing them into my Rebel forces. You, on the other hand, did a lot of work on yours by literally sculpting them.
I sculpted a couple. Because I know that the Rebels make a point of not being an exclusively human organization.
Right.
There are still limitations to that because probably for practical reasons when they were filming, but the Rebels are supposed to be a bit more inclusive. And I didn't want to use the same Duros over and over again because that would just start to look – it would stand out a bit repetitive.
Yeah. As someone who cut a lot of Duros heads off, I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, go ahead.
So I ended up – so I think I only used one Duros head. And I cut the heads off the rest of the Duros, and I replaced them with other Rebel Trooper heads, so that the Duros body had a human head on it,
right?
Which left me with other headless models, and then I've just sculpted different species as I've kind of come to it. Either sculpted or taken the cheap option and just painted them like with blue skin to make like a Chiss warrior or green or whatever. Just added different colors in, but I sculpted a couple as well. So I sculpted a Gran.
Yes. So good.
And I sculpted what I wanted to look like a Bothan. I don't think I'm quite sure what a Bothan's supposed to look like. It's sort of like a cross between a space goat lion thing,
yes.
But that's kind of what I went for. I probably need to sculpt up a whole squad of Bothans and then have them all die so that I can say many Bothans died for whatever they just did. But
there's no dad jokes when we play these games, ever.
Not at all. No. We're very serious when we play. But yeah, so I've got a couple of aliens in there.
You have some Twi'lek too, right?
Oh yeah, I did. I made a Twi'lek. One of my leaders. Yeah. I like that because they're pretty easy to sculpt. There's no surface detail on those Leku. They're just worms of putty. So if you've never used putty before and you're just getting into the hobby, doing some Twi'leks is an easy starting off point.
Yeah, some nice cylinders of, and then you make little cones. You round off one end, taper one end, and then just attach it to the back of the head to the flat bit, and Bob's your uncle. There you go. Man, why am I using all these weird Australian acronyms? Anyway, moving on.
And there's probably quite a few. There's probably quite a few aliens you could make like that. Just in the same sort of way, I guess for the same reasons they existed in the movies. Like how can we make Bib Fortuna look like an alien without costing too much? We'll just stick some some latex tentacles on the back of his head and put a strap over it and give him some pointy teeth, and bam,
You're all set. Mm-hmm.
we'll have an alien. For painting, I just decided to go with the colours that the Hoth troopers looked like they had from the film. So fairly muted, pale colours. To offset the stormtroopers, who are also a pale muted colour, I tried to give the rebels a bit more of a warm white palette.
You did.
And the Imperials a cold white palette. So there's a bit more sort of beige, cream, off-white for the rebels, and just straight up greys and white for the stormtroopers, just to visually distinguish them.
Yeah, your rebels have a very bony, creamy consistency compared to the, as you say, your Imperials are very stark, and they really do look very different on the tabletop, which is great to see, given that often when you see them portrayed on the tabletop, they're often identical or very similar color palettes. I think you did a very good job of, making that distinction very obvious.
Thank you. And then for the only other thing I think I mentioned is the airspeeder. The conversion you've mentioned already. We've talked about that. Mm-hmm. But for painting it, I was really torn. I really liked the classic, grey with orange markings, but I wanted to do something a little bit different to just make it look a little bit less, a little more slapdash, because it's a rebellion, and they struggle to find their equipment at times. So I went with the classic color scheme from the movie, but then I went in and sponged on a bunch of yellow. Mm-hmm. To suggest that this was a sand speeder or something that was used on a desert planet and has been whitewashed and sort of marked up to fit the new terrain on Hoth or the snow planet. But it was a rushed job, and it's coming undone.
Now, you did say that was kind of the last thing you were going to talk about, but I'm not going to let you stop there, because I think one of the coolest things that makes your army absolutely work is the fact that you have converted your characters, and you have most of the original sort of heroic lineup in your army already, and I know you're looking to add the rest. But let's talk a little bit about your Han in particular, and then maybe some of the other models that you converted, because they look sensational.
Oh, thank you. The Han, he needed a bit of work, so I added a big furry hood to him. Mm-hmm. I gave him some cuffs on his sleeves just to sort of turn his fairly light jacket into a much heavier looking jacket. And I had to give him a set of goggles as well. So I tried to match Han when he's out with Chewie. We didn't hit it that hard when they're taking down the probe droid.
Leave my probe droid alone. Yeah,
that's what I was going for. Nice. The model works, like
totally.
The model I had to base it on still fits. So still looks like Han to me. Mm-hmm. So I was happy with that. Leia, I had to do a fair bit to Leia, and because I wanted to get that kind of padded look that she's wearing, that sort of almost jumpsuit. It's not. I don't think it is jumpsuit because it's two different colors, the pants and the top. But she's got a very sort of heavy padded top on. But because I had to work on top of the existing textures, it looked a little bit too padded to me. So she looks a little bit top heavy, but I still thought it worked out pretty well. And for all these, I just painted the hands white to represent gloves. So hands as are, but just give them some sort of heavy cuffs and then paint the hands coloured, and it looks like they're wearing heavy gloves. So that works. That worked well in all cases. And for Luke, so the first thing I did with Luke, as I did with Vader, was to cut the blades off and put some LEDs in there. I was really pleasantly surprised to see that you can buy some really tiny LEDs now that are pre-soldered, so you don't need to solder anything.
So good.
And I haven't. So my original plan was, I found this product conductive paint. And I thought, I'll just paint, before I prime, I'll just paint a line up one leg and a line down the other leg, and that'll be my circuit.
And how'd that work out?
Have a button in the base. That paint between Luke's feet and his hands, way too much resistance.
Yeah.
And not the thematic kind. So it did not work.
Nice. Yeah.
So I got rid of the conductive paint. I still have it, but it's dead to me. It's useless.
It's useless.
I then had to go with the brute force way of running the LED leads through Luke. And to do that, I had to cut him up into a lot of different pieces because you can pretty much only drill in a straight line through a model. And so I cut him into pieces, and I drilled some thin channels through his arms, down his torso, down his legs that come out of his feet. Mm-hmm. And then there's a button cell in the base. And so the LED sits just inside his fists, and it's tiny. Like I think it's about 0.5 mil by 0.5 mil square is the LED chip. It's minuscule. And so they're easy to hide in things. And the cool thing about these is that seemingly there's enough resistance in them that you only need the LED and a button cell. You don't need any other components. And I was expecting to need to add some more resistance, but they're fine. So the LED sits inside his hands, inside his fists, and then I just attached a piece of acrylic rod, a clear acrylic rod. I bought LEDs of different colors, so I got some greens, some reds, some blues, and the acrylic rod is all just transparent.
Sweet, yeah.
I was looking for colored acrylic rod. I just couldn't find it thin enough. So,
man, it looks really sweet, and I didn't realize that you actually sat that in his hands. It hides so well. I was actually just looking at pictures of your model, and it's pretty spectacular that you're able to get that in that little tiny space, especially given how challenging. Again, I don't want to sound critical here, but the soft plastic, particularly of the earlier kits, is a little challenging to work with sometimes. And to be able, I would have imagined you would have had to do some significant cutting to be able to, get all that in there, because it is very hard to drill through from personal experience.
Yeah. I think after I had done all that structural work, I still wanted a Hoth Luke, which is flight suit Luke. Mm-hmm. But I was beyond doing any green stuff or any sculpting work. So I just took the stock Luke and painted him orange.
Yeah.
And I didn't give him a flight vest. Is that what it is? What's it called? A flight vest?
Exactly.
I didn't give him that. He hasn't got the weird strap that goes underneath his junk. He's just Luke out of the box, painted orange. And I like looking at it at first glance. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's Luke in a flight suit. It doesn't bother me that he's missing the vest.
Yeah, I actually I've been playing against your Luke since we started playing this game, and I mentioned to you the other day, I was like, oh, you must have put a lot of work in by puttying the flight strap between his knees, and you said, I don't have a flight strap between his knees. It's just your paint job it's a good paint job on the model, and because it's the different color, my brain automatically added it, and I didn't even realize my memory had done that. And it was I assumed he had the flight vest, and it isn't until I just looked at the picture that I realized he didn't have that. So yeah, again, I think sometimes in Legion a little bit of painting, and the fact that we have such strong ingrained memories for some of these movies means that our brain adds details that sometimes aren't there, which is helpful.
And I like having the orange in there as well. I think it's because, again, we're working with sort of a very expected color palettes here, and without Luke there, the army is very beige.
Yes.
Literally. But yes, it's very beige. And so having some elements of color there, it's hard to make all the individual models pop.
Yeah.
But you could still make the Force pop with a couple of well-placed bits of color. Like, not to get ahead of ourselves, and we'll talk more about this later on, but I really like your bounty hunter squad that you've been
Thank you.
putting together, because it's going to add some new colors to your force, which aren't going to be there otherwise.
Exactly.
And I know I was talking about coherency before, but I think this is warranted. I think it's going to add some visual interest to your force.
Exactly. And, when you have a wall of stormtroopers, adding something that's a little bit different goes a long way. But we'll talk about that when we talk Mimbin next week.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, next month, next episode. Sorry. Now, Drew, you also spent some time converting up your laser tower, your 1.4 FD laser cannon. Now that's fairly, the pizza plate cannon. It's fairly straightforward, right? You didn't do a ton of converting to it because the crew were already in Hoth gear, but you did, woohoo! But you added a lot of snow. It absolutely feels like a static piece of the Hoth terrain, and I thought that was a really nice flourish that really makes it tie in with the rest of your force.
Yeah, I figured out a recipe for snow that I'm really happy with for the models that I've been using. I was trying to find out ways to do it on the cheap, like buying baking soda or anything like that. But everything, I read too many things that said baking soda was going to cause you problems.
And it turns yellow.
Yeah. And I read things saying, here's how you do it so it doesn't turn yellow. I heard other things saying it's going to turn to green slime in 3 years' time. And I just said, no, I'll just splash out and buy some. I got some Woodland Scenics snow effect. And it's just a mixture of that with some water and some PVA. You make a bit of a paste and just plop it on. And if you make it wet enough, it smooths itself out. It finds its level, and it just looks like lumps of snow to me. People who live in snowy climates might disagree with me, but it works for me.
Yeah, you know what they say. Eskimos have 50 some odd ways of saying snow. So there's a lot of different kinds of snow, buddy. Just saying.
Yeah.
As someone who grew up in Boston, there's a lot of different kinds of snow. Now, Drew, let's get into how you would build your force, not physically, because I know you've talked about that, but what would you put into a themed rebel force? We did talk at length about how you do an Imperial one. Clearly you have your choice of characters from the movie. There's tons. You have Han, you have Chewie, Luke, Leia. R2 and 3PO when they come out. There's just tons of choice that you can sort of stick in there. How are you going to build a force that's themed for Hoth? And don't say Tauntauns. We already know. Sorry.
The obvious ones.
Tauntauns.
The rebels are a much more static force in this battle.
Right.
Like they're entrenched. This is my sort of initial, very tongue-in-cheek suggestion was to model the army all in trenches and just like stick the heads on the bases and say it's thematic. I won't talk about True Line of Sight right now. But,
yeah, exactly.
I decided not to go with that route. Yeah. But so I've just got a lot of bros on the line. I've got the laser cannon. I'd possibly get a second one. I do have a second one. I just haven't painted it up yet. Just in terms of equipment.
Now you do own the ion cannon. I know you've painted some ion cannons. I know you've painted up some of the rotary cannons. Are you excited about the new trooper expansion that gives your rebel troopers and some different specialist types, different weapon types? Have you been paying attention to that? Do you think that would help add some variety to your Hoth force? Yeah, I think it'd mix things up. I don't like looking at the films. I don't remember seeing a lot of special weapons in the troop squads. Right. Possibly as a sort of a bit of a tenuous link to the theme, but probably ion just to sort of have a nod to that the ion cannon sitting up there taking down Star Destroyers. So that's probably what I would go for, just in that force. Even though I'm probably not going to be using the ion cannons to take down AT-ATs. Nice. But I'd probably use Leia would probably be a good choice for a static force because she's got some
some more passive effects that help the troops around her rather than taking the fight
Definitely
to the enemy. And so I think that's the style of play that I would go for. Is I shudder to say it, but a bit of a gun line. Obviously, I haven't got around to it yet, but I would get some Tauntauns and put them in there. And I haven't got any veterans yet either, but I'll probably put those in there as well.
And that will definitely add out give you a couple more weapon options, because there's the emplacement trooper that comes alongside that, and that'll be cool because that'll add a little more firepower to your gun line.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then to cap it off, and this is the maybe the elephant in the room, I would absolutely 100% have an airspeeder in my army.
Yes.
And every single battle I've played, I've taken that airspeeder because
you have.
I love the model. It fits the theme. And I want to use it. I want to play with it.
Yeah. And I think especially since both the speeder itself and its upgrades received that points drop, I think that really has opened up some nice new options for you to add to the rest of your army, hasn't it?
Yeah. It just lets you fit a few more things in there. I probably haven't played around too much with the spare points to see what I could really do with them yet. But I'd like to try some of the new options for the new
Upgrades.
the Trooper Squad upgrades.
Yeah.
Just see what I can fit in there. What's going to sort of help the force do what it needs to do.
Nice. Now, of course, they're not explicitly mentioned in the movie or maybe seen, but there are a bunch of guys pointing rifles and shooting. So I know people have mentioned that this would be an ideal sort of force, that you could add some snipers in as well. I know that they are very popular, but I think that if you are making this Rebel gun line, I don't think that would be out of place. In fact, you have a very well-painted sniper as part of your force that matches your army well.
Oh, thank you. I did go slightly colder white for the scouts just to differentiate them a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't manage to fix the warp in my sniper rifle. I did correct it, and it warped itself back again.
Yep. Well, mine is equally saggy, so I hear what you're saying. It's part of the piece. I do. Now, while we're talking forces here, now you did mention you have the laser cannon. Now, I absolutely love the look of that laser cannon. But as I said, as a kid, I had the Hoth playset, and I did not have the ATST or the AT-AT, but I did have the Hoth playset, which had the laser cannons on it. And for me, when they put out the laser cannon, I was always hoping that they would do the DF9, which is, the taller cylindrical turret. Those were the ones that grabbed me as a kid, and I played with constantly, mainly because you could open up and put action figures inside and then close it. I don't know why. I just thought that was cool. And because of that, when Gale Force 9 put out their Battlefield in a Box expansions for Star Wars Legion, I know a lot of people have been talking about how maybe they're not the right scale at times, but they do a beautiful, if not very expensive, shield generator, because you have to buy each segment of the generator and then put them together, and each part is not inexpensive in Australia. However, they are nice and huge and well painted. I have seen them in person. They're great. I'm really happy though with the laser turret attach or box that you can get as part of that range, because not only do you get the pizza gun, you also get a DF9. And that was awesome. So I bought one of those for when we start playing more games in Hoth. Now, I don't know what I'd use that on the tabletop for, even though I really want to put it there. So I have some black cotton, and so I'm thinking about drilling a hole in the roof, just a small one. So if I didn't put it on, it wouldn't be noticeable, but running a pin through the wool and maybe having you run one of your LEDs and lights through it. And so all of a sudden it looks like it's been hit and is sort of exploded and is destroyed. But I think, it's not necessarily going to add a ton of terrain to the tabletop, it being a cylinder. However, I think it would add a nice visual to a tabletop that would absolutely make an otherwise, I don't want to say barren, frozen wasteland, but because there will be other terrain on there. I have seen your Hoth board and it's gorgeous. But when you add with lots of terrain, but once you add something like that, it all of a sudden goes from being wintry to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How big is the turret? The Gale Force 9 one?
It is, so the pizza gun is significantly larger than the FFG model, for those wondering. And I'm going to pick up the turret right now while we're podcasting. It's maybe 4 inches tall. I don't see my tape measure handy. But yeah.
How wide's the base? I'm wondering how wide the base is.
It's very small now that I'm looking at it. Again, my memory of it is huge because of the toy that I played with as a kid. Weirdly, the turret on the top is bigger, and the cylinder it's sitting on is smaller than the actual Star Wars.
Like, I mean, lines are side to side, and if you have a gentleman's agreement, could you not just use it as a second laser cannon?
Oh, absolutely. You would just have it being line of sight issues. It would just be taller than the other
but you
one.
Maybe you could like paint some markings on it that indicate the height of the laser cannon.
True.
How high that would be in, say, like, if we're worried about line of sight, this is how tall it actually is. Just look at these markings. But you could make the markings look like battle damage or something like that, though. So they wouldn't.
Yes,
they wouldn't
absolutely
look out of place, but just gives you an indication of how tall it should be.
And it is a nice pre-painted bit of terrain. I do love it. I do think it is fun, though, that of course it has the door modeled on it. It doesn't open, but it just from the kid who played with that toy, I love that detail that it's on there, and very fond. Anyway, so Drew, I did mention that you have a tabletop of Hoth terrain. You want to talk to us a little bit about how you made that, because a terrain is an important part of how we make the Star Wars universe come to life on our tabletops. What did you add? Because you've added a few really cool and interesting bits that have made your table pop.
I was lucky enough to find it's out of scale, but it was a Millennium Falcon at my local op shop, just sitting there as a Revel kit, I think. Probably closer to 1/72nd scale, maybe, like Hot Wheels scale.
Yep.
But I wasn't fussed, so I just took that. I cut it up and just had it stuck in the snow, like kind of what if scenario. The Falcon got shot down on the way out. Ugh, bad luck. Bad luck rebellion.
But you didn't just cut it in a way that you would normally expect with maybe a quote-unquote crash spaceship. You cut it sort of you cut it down the middle on the side, and then you have two very long bits that are sort of round that stick out of the ground, sort of the back in one part and the front in another.
Yeah,
and by
so
doing
two
so,
sections.
you've made some very effective blocking terrain that is really useful when you're looking at a barren landscape like Hoth.
Yeah, so the front section sticks up about 10 inches above the battlefield. It is blocking terrain, but there's a few things scattered on the base around it that you can, like the dish that's embedded in the snow, so you can get in and around that. And I did a fairly simple paint job on that, just washes and a few picked out panels, and then just hit it with the snow, which on top of a simple paint scheme, I was quite happy with how that turned out. I gave plaster rocks a bit of a try just to see how they go. So I made some sort of rocky outcrops, hill type things, which they're a little bit more interactive. So you can walk on top of them, you can move troops on top of those. A lot of the terrain I've got for that table is blocking terrain, and it'd be nice to have a few more interactive pieces. I've just picked up some trees, and I'm planning to make some forests, some sort of snowy forest a la Starkiller Base, with some sort of removable sections, so they are functional game-wise, but hopefully they have a bit of detail, a bit of interest to them. Someone was nice enough to give me a 3D printed crashed TIE fighter.
I don't know who that would have been.
I wonder
It
who
is.
took
It
it.
is from Legion Terrain, by the way. In case you're wondering where I was talking about the wrecked AT-AT from before, I got the wrecked AT-AT and the wrecked Imperial Fighter from LegionTerrain.com. And they are excellent. I highly recommend if you have not checked them out. Anyway,
Really
sorry.
nice ones.
Yeah. So Drew, so
yeah.
you have that as well.
Yeah, and yeah, and just working with snow effects. I didn't use that snow recipe for all the terrain because even that would cost me $1 bazillion in snow. So I found who was it that told me or pointed out? I think it was Mel, the terrain tutor, suggested using acrylic cork.
Yes. That's
so acrylic cork mixed with some just plain white, like acrylic white paint, like the cheap stuff, not your model paint, just cheap poster paint kind of stuff, and a little bit of your snow flock mixed all together to make a paste, and then use that to paint up, and then once you've done that, dust it with your snow effect, and that gives you really nice thick looking snow, without using like a whole tube of woodland scenic snow effect to cover terrain pieces, because if you did that with just snow and PVA, it wouldn't go very far at all.
No, and it would be very expensive to do on a mass scale. Right on.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you have more than a full terrain table of terrain there. Now we've been putting it on my mats. Now I typically use Deep Cut Studios. I use a bunch of their cloth mats because they're easy to store. And they have some fantastic 3x3 mats. I have 2 3x3s that I put side by side, and it works well by 6x3. But I'm pretty sure you can still get their mats in 6x3 as well. And they do a very nice winter board. And the great thing about those is that they're machine washable. So, after a lot of, because I've been using those for all sorts of events and game systems, and because they're white, sometimes, they get a little dirty. And so just being able to machine wash them and not have them be totally ruined is just a fantastic feature. I know a lot of people like mouse pad mats, and I have quite a few as well. They're just harder to store when you have as much terrain as I do, but to have those cloth ones just be able to fold up neatly, and basically they take up about as much room as a t-shirt folded up in a closet, is just such a godsend. It's amazing. So yeah, fantastic.
I was just thinking, Brad, for those who aren't here from Cast Dice, it's probably worth putting up a link or something for them to see the. We did a battle report a few weeks back, which is on YouTube.
That's right, on the Cast on the Cast Dice YouTube page. Yep.
Yeah, and people can see the terrain we're talking about and some of the figures we're talking about there.
And your Hoth army, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Drew, I think we've done a pretty good job of talking about Hoth today, one of my favorite Star Wars battles. I'm sure we could have gone into more tactical depth, and perhaps we might in the future, or in a YouTube battle report, but I think this is a good place to start for us. Any final words you have for our lovely audience before I start talking about where they can find us?
Just thanks for listening to our first episode. It's been exciting to get where we are now, just to sort of plan and get things set up. And I'm really excited to bring people more of what we're doing in the hobby, but also to see what other people are doing.
Yes.
So I'd love to be a place where people can share what they're working on, show off the themes that they're proud of, show off the armies that they think are cool, because that's what we want to see, is just people putting things on the table that they're proud of and that they're excited about.
Absolutely. And we have intentionally set up our Facebook page so that people can share some of their work. And if for some reason it isn't working, you can please just message us your pictures and we can share. We've already got pictures up from friends of the show Dan, friends of the show Jermaine, and friends of the show Brian Cook. And look, we're going to share our own stuff and lots of other people's as well. I have quite a lot of beautifully painted things from our good buddy Patch that I will also be sharing. So yeah, absolutely. And I do want to also thank you guys for listening today. I know this is a little different from a lot of the Star Wars Legion podcasts that are out there, and we are still kind of finding our sea legs, but I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope you come back. We'd love to enter in a new way to talk about Star Wars Legion with you. Now, if you are looking to find us, you can find this podcast on most podcatchers. I particularly use iTunes. Guys, I won't make a big deal of asking for you to do this every week, but it is being the first episode. If you liked what you heard today or you are interested and would like to hear more, I would ask that you please click subscribe both to the Cast Dice Facebook page, the Cast Dice YouTube page, and the Beyond the First Marker Facebook page, and subscribe to the podcast, just so folks can find us and we can help to find an audience for a brand new podcast. So again, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to talking more Star Wars in the future.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks to the audience.
That's right. And until next time, gang, may the Force be with you.
Thank you for listening. For more information about the topics discussed in today's episode, please find our Facebook page by searching for Beyond the First Marker. Please message us there if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions that will help us improve the quality of this show. Until next time, may the Force be with you.